Hello. The video that follows completes the activities of the Excel Power Query Checkbook with a description of transactions archiving. It utilizes Power Query append capabilities as well as M code variables and Visual Basic for Applications macro code. I hope you'll find it useful. This is the 8th video in the Excel Power Query Checkbook series, and it describes the archiving of checkbook transactions. You can see that I've created a worksheet here called Archive 1 with a table in it with some dummy data that represents the end of the previous year. We can see that the name is Table Archive, and we're going to append the transactions, the checkbook transactions, to this table. We have to manipulate it a little bit first because we need it to be a query. In order to do that, we click anywhere inside the table. And from the Data tab, we're going to create a query from Table Arrange. And the Power Query window comes up. We have the table generated in the query. We want the date to be just a date, not date time. So we're going to change that to date. And I think the rest of the data types are fine. Make sure the amount's good. Yeah, decimal number will work. So let's rename this to set type. And when we close and load, we're going to load to a new worksheet. We're going to do that so that we can create a place that we can just append year after year to a query. So click the close and load. We have a new worksheet. And a couple things that we're going to do is, one, we can see that it says Table Archive 2. We're going to go back to the Archive 1 worksheet and delete it. Now that it's gone, we're going to rename the worksheet that was just created to Archive. We're going to rename the table. Instead of Archive 2, it's just going to be TBL Archive. And then we're going to format it like the previous table was formatted. This is going to be accounting format. And this is a table we're going to use in an append mode to move the transactions from the transactions worksheet. Let's go ahead and create an archive group. So we're going to move to a group, new group, archive. Now it's time to prep the records in the transactions worksheet. So let's move over to the transactions worksheet. You can see I've added a few of next year transactions in there because we won't be archiving until we have all the transactions for the year we're archiving cleared. We need another query. So from the Data tab, Get Data, and we're going to go from other sources and start with a blank query. And we'll begin with the query we've already created for Table Check. And we're going to need an archived year. And in order to do that, we're going to use a variable. So let's move to the advanced editor. And just above the source, we use a variable DT. Right now, we're going to set it equal to 2021. But we'll be using a named range to grab the correct date from the worksheet later. We're going to need a comma for that. Okay, we won't need the balance column, so we'll just eliminate that, remove it. And we're going to need a column for the year, and we're going to use our variable to put that in. So in the Add Column area, we're going to get a custom column. I'm going to call it year. It's going to equal our variable DT. And now that's going to be moved over near the date. And let's make sure we've got a good data type on it. We want that to be a whole number. Let's go ahead and rename the steps. So we remove balance, add the year, reorder, and set the type. And we want to be sure the dates of the archived records are just in the archive year. So from the date filter, we want to be between the first and last day of the year. That's the first. That's the last. And now we should just enter in our variable here so that it'll be consistent year to year. Okay. This is going to be a connection-only query. I'm going to call it prep archive. And when we load, we're going to load connection only. We'll add this to the group, the archive group. And now let's go back to the Files tab here and get ourselves a named range. So right now we're just going to put in 221. We'll actually add a formula to that later. But here's our named range. Next archive. And now we'll go and edit the archive prep. Go to the advanced editor. And in our date, instead of 221, we're going to get it from the worksheet. So that starts out with Excel current workbook and the name is next archive. We want the content of that named range. And there's only one element in it. And because it's a named range, it'll be column 1. Okay, let's make sure that that's still 2021, and it is. That's good. And we'll go ahead and close and load. And now let's archive the checkbook transactions. We do that by editing the table archive, using the append button to append the prep archive table. We'll rename that to append checkbook. Close and load. And we can do this year in and year out and just keep increasing the table. We can add a totals row to the table and it will all continue to work. And now let's replace the 2021 with a formula. So the next year to archive will be one more than the max year in the archive table. So equals max, and the archive table is table archive. And we want the year plus 1. And that should always give us the next year to archive. The last step is the removal of the archived records from the transactions worksheet. And since we want to keep the formulas, we're going to do that with a VBA macro, which really is only going to give us a new starting balance and remove the archived rows. That's the only two things it's going to do. So from the Developer tab, we'll go back to the Visual Basic Editor and insert a module. And I'm going to paste the code in and then explain its activity. We have the usual dimension statements. One of the first things we're going to do is make sure the user recognizes what year the archive involved. And so that's going to go into a variable called YR. I'm going to set some object variables. We're going to find worksheet rows of the first table entry of table check and the last table entry, because we're going to loop through that, and we can see that here in the loop, starting at the bottom of the table until we hit the archived year. Once we hit the archived year, then the balance of that row, that would be the last row of the archived year, that becomes a new balance, and it gets stored in the new val variable. And then we take the datasheet row, which is our I variable, and that's going to be the last row that's going to be deleted. So finally, we make sure the user wants to do the deletion and put in the new balance. Once the user says yes, we create a variable which holds the first and last rows. That's going to designate the range. We do the deletion. We insert the new balance in the first row of the worksheet in the 7th column, and then we exit the macro. So actually, it's a pretty straightforward operation. Let's go ahead and close this, move to the transactions worksheet, and after we run the macro, we should only see our 2022 rows and the beginning balance, which should be 441.68. Let's go ahead and run it. We archive 2021. We want to continue. And there they are. This ends the Excel Power Query checkbook.